Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this Friday lunchtime slot. I hope all of you had something to eat, or at least I just ate a Snickers bar. You know, Snickers does satisfy. This is for the video, so sure. I'm getting my plugs in before we begin here. So my name is John Peterson, and I'm someone who studies the history of war games and role-playing games, and in general, fan and science fiction cultures, the late 20th century into the 21st century. And I'm really delighted today to be able to talk here with an old friend of mine, with someone that I've been working with on game history for many, many years now. When do you think it was we first met?
We first met at Gary Con 2013. I remember it very
Gary
well.
Con 2013.
I remember handing you my copy of Playing at the World, and you being dismayed at the disheveled.
The state of it,
Yeah.
yeah. So the first printings of Playing at the World, they had this like laminate on it before we moved to a matte cover for it, and these things would just fall apart and they looked just gross. But I could tell that it had seen some good use, and so I figured Matthew might be someone who is actually interested in the history that we talked about in that book. But since then, Matthew has really been helpful to me when I've been trying to understand the history of Gen Con. And the history of Gen Con is so important to understanding the history of modern gaming. It really hit the sweet spot coming in 1968, and of course taking us all the way through to where we are today, a place Gary Gygax, the founder of Gen Con, could never have imagined.
No, definitely not.
That we'd be here with 75,000 people in Indianapolis instead of the, let's call it 95 who showed up for the first Gen Con in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin in 1968. That's a bit of a hockey stick if you look at it over the years. And, among the many things Matthew's helped with, I mean, when we, in 2017, put up a little museum for the 50th Gen Con, some of you may recall, we actually did a replica, basically, of the horticultural hall in Lake Geneva, down on the 50-yard line of Lucas Oil Field. How is that for awesome?
It's just amazing seeing just how much it's grown now. I mean, that tiny little building just fit, and there was still plenty of playing field left. It was amazing, yeah.
But, and Matthew did a project around that time. Is when that project started, I think? Where
Yeah,
you
started
were,
2016, 2017, yeah.
Yep, where he was finding all the programs and kind of correlating what all the events were and giving us the first real attempt to data mine what events at Gen Con looked like. This year, I understand, it's even more than 25. It's closer to 30,000 events that we have here, which is insane. I think, we probably could count on at least, 2 hands worth of fingers the scheduled events that occurred at that first Gen Con back in 1968. But I was so delighted when Matthew told me that he had decided to take on a project somebody needed to do. I personally did not have the bandwidth to do it, to really do a book-length treatment of Gen Con and of the influence that Gen Con has really had on modern gaming and the community it's created and the power that that's unlocked, and to try to see deeper, kind of behind the veil of Gen Con and what's going on with all this. What it means to have, as the title says, a gathering of gamers. Yeah. So everybody, please give Matt a hand for doing this.
Thank you, everybody.
So I told a little bit about how you got started, but
Yeah.
kind of talk about the project from your perspective.
Yeah, so the project really I got involved in the whole gaming history back right when I met John working on some Dungeons & Dragons documentaries that kind of sort of went nowhere. One of them is still percolating around somewhere. Whether we'll ever see it, I don't know, but it exists.
No comment.
Yeah. But from there, I've always loved Gen Con. It's my kind of impetus for gaming history. I was lucky enough to live in a suburb of Milwaukee back when it was in the city. So I had been attending since 1992. I haven't made it every year, but I've been coming for a long time. And so when the 50th came up and I knew John was doing stuff with Gen Con, I had, because of documentary projects, had a small relationship with Peter Atkinson. So I reached out to him and said, hey, can I build this website, data mine these programs, and really start an analysis of the events that you could do at Gen Con. So, in my day job at Temple University, they were okay with me doing this. Me and a staff of students went and we found every single Gen Con program. Some of them we had to beg, borrow, no stealing, luckily. But we put them together, we digitized them, and we scanned them all through an OCR and put them up. So, if it still exists to this day, it's best50yearsingaming.com if you want to check it out. But you can go there and you can look up every event that's ever happened at Gen Con on there. And the great thing about it, if any of you are data scientists or anything like that, we put this up hoping more people do it academically, and a few have. But you can go download all the data that we put up. So you can go there and you can examine all of the events. I mean, part of my day job is I run a digital humanities lab, which means I work with text as data a lot. So you can, there's a project just waiting in there to go and mine all of, the event descriptions and figure out how events at Gen Con have changed over the years and things like that. So that project happened, and then after that there was kind of a little lull. I know I helped out John with a couple things, but mostly, and then the pandemic hit, of course, but I was looking for something more to do to keep up with my game history. So I talked to John a little bit about, what are some needs? What's been missing out here? And one of them that John spoke up about was, a true treatise on the history of Gen Con and a year-by-year analysis. At first I was like, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but I'm like, well, the book kind of exists from Robin Laws, who did the oral history of Gen Con. But then looking at it more, looking at the different sources and how that book was created, it really didn't fit everything that we wanted to do to document the true history of it. And on top of that, that book came out in 2007, it was finished in 2006, so it was almost 20 years of history that the book didn't cover. So during the pandemic then, I started gathering sources. Luckily for my previous work with the documentaries and all the programs, I had a lot of material to begin with. John was very gracious and helped me out with some of the earlier stuff because frankly, you're the only person I know who has some of that. So that came in handy. And I just began gathering sources and creating notes and doing some of my own data crunching. There's some data work of data analysis in there as well, looking at events over the years. So yeah, it took about 2.5 years to write, and another year to go through all of the book publishing processes and everything like that. And very soon in your hands, either this month or September at the latest, you can get it and go through your own and see what I have found out about the history of Gen Con.
And I will say, I've had a chance maybe to look behind the curtain a little bit at this book. And I think even if you're someone who thinks they know Gen Con, thinks they're pretty familiar with this history, there's going to be a lot of revelations in there for you. A lot of things that kind of, again, pierce the veil a bit. And, because Gen Con has been a lot of things over the years.
Yes.
And Gen Con has transformed profoundly from back where it was in 1968 to where it's gotten to here. Maybe that'd be a helpful way, first lens, for us to start kind of talking about what you discuss in the book. Because, in those starting really scrappy years, of course, there were these wargaming clubs. In 1968, D&D was not out yet. It would not come out until 1974. Fantasy wargaming, more or less unheard of. What people were playing were conflict simulation games. And so when you look at the events and you look at who was responsible for Gen Con at the time, there were a club that at the time was called the International Federation of Wargaming. And they were a club that was focused on playing games, largely games made by the Avalon Hill Corporation. And I personally am thrilled, by the way, to be able to go to the exhibit hall and see AH still here and still selling so many classic titles. I'm always trying to convince them they should go back and do more of the oldest of old school titles. But why don't you talk us through a bit about kind of what the transformation was from that early war game focused community up until we get to suddenly 1974 into 76 when a lot of things radically changed.
Yeah, so in the early years of Gen Con, as John said, it was basically just a club activity. People had no way, they didn't have no way, but the war gamers were spread out so far, it was very difficult to find people to play games face to face. So why not do conventions? So they started out, and it was just basically a hodgepodge of people coming together, throwing a little money collectively together, and having a great time gaming. The very first Gen Con was supposed to be a one-day affair, and it basically became into a week-long thing at Gary's house, and wrapped up a day later than it was supposed to. They just pretended to clean for, 10 hours or something while war gaming on the side, so no one blinked at them funny. But from there, Dungeons and Dragons came out. And it really changed things for two reasons. One is that obviously you had the shift from war games into RPGs, but also, as we see from all the zine sources, as well as some of the oral history documents that we have and recording for people, this just transition of a new genre of gameplay. And this was all fostered through TSR, of course, who was the publisher of Dungeons and Dragons, and Gen Con was now transitioning. Because no longer was it just a little hodgepodge of gamers coming together, now it was a business. Not Gen Con itself, but the company that was running it was. So they needed it to sell and drive their game. And what better place to have people come together, learn about something than a convention? Bring people in, they don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is, they learn what it is, and then they go home and play with it and tell their friends, and then they're all buying copies sooner or later.
And you know, D&D was notoriously, especially in its earliest iterations, a difficult game to learn off the page, right? You know, reading those pages, especially if you were some war gamer, you know, a lot of people looked at it still through that just conflict simulation lens and tried to figure out, okay, this is a skirmish war games, term that was used a lot at the time, but unlocking that concept of role-playing games, that required getting it firsthand from the people who did it. And so Gary Gygax would be there, Dave Arneson would be there, Ernie Gygax's son would be there, you know, Mike Carr, who is here this time and is, as far as we know, the only person who has attended every Gen Con from 1968 until the present. He was just at our dinner last night. He's here and still running these games. You know, who would go on then to be, of course, a signature TSR employee, the editor of Player's Handbook, the original 1978 one, among many other things. So you know, that component of it, that you got to come in and learn and then be able to go back. We can see this epidemiology of how much D&D spread from people who brought it back to Michigan, people who brought it back to MIT, people who brought it back to LA, and would start working with the people in Los Angeles science fiction fandom. And so that really led to this enormous outburst of creativity. And with it, Gen Con spread, so it really could no longer just be in the Horticultural Hall, which was the place they did flower shows in Lake Geneva. It was not exactly designed to be a venue for a gaming convention, right? What's the funniest venue in Lake Geneva that Gen Con ended up going to?
Oh, I mean, I think anyone who knows the history of it has to say it's the Playboy Club.
The Playboy Club.
Yeah.
So, because there were only so many big resorts in Lake Geneva,
Yeah,
right?
very few. Yeah.
You want to tell more of the story of this, but
Yeah, so they were growing and they knew they had to expand and go somewhere else, which kind of leads to the next biggest expansion. But before that, before they left Lake Geneva, they did desperately to try to find what they could do to stay in town one more time. So they went to the Playboy Club, which is on the outskirts of Lake Geneva, and they had Playboy bunnies serving drinks to the gamers, and you know, there were just all sorts of people going there, and it had air conditioning, which was a wonderful, amazing thing for conventions at the time. In fact, I'm pretty sure the whole stinky gamer thing comes from going to so many cons in the 70s and 80s and having no air conditioning. You can thank that for that. But yeah, there was after the convention, TSR was like, maybe that wasn't the best of ideas, because a lot of young people were playing Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and you know, there were a lot of parents that were like, wait, your convention's where? You want to do what for the weekend? Yeah, no, that's not happening.
But they soon found a better venue for
did.
it the year after. That would be one of two. Well, they had two remaining venues they would go to in Wisconsin before they came here to Indianapolis. And so, I don't know, this profitable for us to go through real quick? You want to talk about this a little?
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
As we get to the process of how we're writing these things in
Yeah,
source
we will.
for sure. But yeah, so Gen Con then moved from Lake Geneva up to University of Wisconsin Parkside. This was a thing that a lot of conventions did. When they got bigger, they didn't know where to go, so they naturally, well, maybe not naturally, but it seemed like a good fit because a lot of them did it, went to university campuses. I think they had the perfect combination of size and facilities. No one was there in the summer, and they were probably a lot cheaper than a convention center. So they went to Parkside, and they started to grow. It's kind of a weird venue for them because there were not really any hotels in the area. It was between Chicago and Milwaukee, so it was kind of in the middle of nowhere a little bit. And a lot of people camped, or there was one year they let people crash in rental spaces there for, I believe it was $3 a night. If you were willing to sleep with 20 other gamers in the same room, you would have crash space. So that was a popular option for that year. They only did it the 1 year. I kind of wonder why. But yeah. But then from Parkside, the convention really grew up and kind of hit its stride when it moved to Milwaukee, into Mecca, the convention center in Milwaukee. This happened in 1985, and it was actually, I mean, this is one thing I found out, when you read the sources, especially ones from TSR, they all talk about how, there's perpetual growth, Gen Con's amazing, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. But when you look at the actual data from it, you find out that it actually kind of stagnated there from 85 until the 88 show. And there wasn't a lot of growth, and they needed to do something. And I don't want to go into it too much, but the way Gen Con continued to grow to become the behemoth it is, that really kicked it off, was the 1988 show, which was combined with the Origins Game Fair. Because at this time, Gen Con was really known as kind of the RPG show. Even though lots and lots of war games or things were happening there, if you wanted war games, a lot of people had it in their heads to go to Origins. So when you bring the two shows together, they had this giant conflagration of just gamers from different types coming. They boosted the war game presence, they boosted the miniatures presence, and it really helped Gen Con's population grow, as well as Origins. I mean, it was a big event. Everybody, it was exciting reading about all the zine entries on this time. I mean, one of them proudly proclaimed the title of their zine as the Orgy Con of
Orgy, yeah.
Coming through and going together, making this all happen.
Well, I think that's a great segue, actually, because talking about Origins and Gen Con, and this can start getting us into methodology a bit, because some of you may be aware that when Origins started in 1975, Gen Con, had been around then for 7 years, right? And they were very determined to present themselves as the national wargaming convention. Avalon Hill had been an early booster of Gen Con, but they decided, ultimately, we'd much rather have our own convention. We're going to have it here in Baltimore, which is where Origins started. Now it's in Columbus.
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio. Yep.
And I'm not a freaking Origins attendee. I need to go. We were talking about this earlier. But the instant that Origins came around, suddenly there was a dispute. Gary Gygax felt like this was an attack on him personally and on his convention personally. Those that have read some of the recent biographical books about Gary Gygax may have come away with the impression he was a little prickly about things like this, and that once he got his back up on it, he really was not going to back down. And so we're left with a lot of interesting textual problems to solve. And in history, we call this source criticism, where you have several sources that are saying things, in this case about attendance, of especially like 1975 Gen Con versus 1975 Origins. And we're left with public proclamations made by TSR and their magazine at the time, a magazine called The Strategic Review, that said this is how many people were coming to Gen Con. And Origins, of course, they had access to the Avalon Hill General, which was really one of the largest publications like everybody read, because it's Avalon Hill's publication at the time, and TSR was still minuscule at this point. We're doing 1975, again, we're talking about a time D&D may have sold 1,500 copies, right? Like at a time that, Monopoly would sell 2 million copies a year. Any reasonable Avalon Hill war game could be bringing in 60,000, 70,000, annually. Yeah. And so D&D, TSR is very much still an underdog. And Gary Gygax, damn it, he just insisted again and again that Gen Con was bigger. It took place then, still that year, in the Horticultural Hall, in that little flower show place. And Origins one was at Johns Hopkins University. Gave people access to dorms to sleep in. Had all the halls, had Levering Hall, like all the main halls of Johns Hopkins at their disposal. And they were claiming, oh, we had these 1,500 attendees here, and so Gary's like, nah, Gen Con had 1,600. And when final tallies came in that suggested maybe Origins had a bit more, Gary's like, nah, actually we had 1,800. We had 1,800 that showed up to the Horticultural Hall. And we're left as historians who look at things like this to try to find answers out of this. And especially convention attendance is something there's a lot of self-reporting about. And as Matt will explain in a minute, there's a lot of different metrics you can use to determine what should count as attendance. And different conventions weaponize those alternate methodologies as ways to present themselves as larger than other conventions. Yeah. And I don't know, you want to get in a bit to what investigating something like this looks like?
Yeah, so it was very difficult to look at this. There were times where I can't remember what the year was offhand, but there was a Gen Con year I looked, and the internal numbers said it was something like 1,200 attendees. And then they said an announcement and a press release after the convention that it was like 1,700. And then I don't know who did this at TSR, but someone gave an interview to a trade magazine, and they said it was like 4,800 people, all for the same convention for the same year. It was like ridiculous. And then on top of that, there are two popular methods to count attendees, and they usually kind of hide the fact of which one they use. The first one is just unique attendees. That's you buy one badge for one day, whole convention, doesn't matter what it is, you get counted one time. The other one that a lot of people use back in the day, and some conventions still do, is called turnstile. I hope that's a train.
It's the ghost of Gary Gygax who's about to strike us down, but had the heresy of defying him.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
that's okay. Yeah, but the other one is turnstile attendance, which basically means every time you go in the door, you get counted. So if you go for 4 days, you get counted. You go in, you leave for lunch, you come back, you get counted twice.
You count it again.
Yeah. So they would do that. So some of these years, it's really hard to tell the number. Like, did they really have 5,000 people come, or was it 1,000 people just coming and going every day? And this still happens today. If you look, there's a misconception that Gen Con is not the largest tabletop gaming convention in the world. I am convinced that it is. And a lot of this comes down to people think that Escher Spiel is bigger. Well, guess what? Escher Spiel uses turnstile counting. So when you see that they put out that there's 220,000 people attending, you got to at least divide that number by 4 and probably take a few more off the top of that to figure out exactly how many people are showing up. Escher Spiel is still a huge convention. It's pretty close to the same size as Gen Con, but there was one year, I believe it was 2018, I might be wrong about that Gen Con also released their numbers as turnstile, and their turnstile count was something like 30,000 higher than Essence was. So, yeah, but it's tricky finding these numbers and interrogating the sources and finding out exactly what is true and what is not.
And for many years, there are no official numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Especially, because Gen Con and Origins, they kind of ran neck and neck up into the late 70s and the 80s, and then it really began to look like Gen Con was going to pull ahead, and that Origins was going to be left behind in this. And so Origins just stopped reporting numbers, right?
Yeah.
And people, you would have to go through then, the best places I can find, anyway, for sources about this, is to go back to fanzines of like exhibitors who went there and were like, well, our estimate, just based on what we saw, and we go to a lot of cons and we get a general sense from places where we do get this reporting, there could have been 1,400 people there, right? And, so and I am really, the facility is not actually going to collapse, is it? Right? Are we sure of this?
Just the ghost train.
Oh no, that's the train tracks is normal.
Yeah.
That sound is normal when the trains run overhead. This
Yeah.
building
always has.
Yeah, it always has it.
That's when it says ghost
Okay.
train.
And, I mean, you can be in one of the hotel rooms and get this noise on this side of the building.
That's a long train.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a freight train.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll try to ignore my imminent death and get back to this. For the very earliest Gen Cons, this is especially problematic.
Yeah.
Where you really just had so little reporting about this, and I know working on Playing at the World, where I really did try to put hard numbers on how big these Gen Cons were, I would end up working from kind of a consensus of a set of sources that were all would give a little piece of this. Some people would say, oh, I was there. There was 250 people there on Saturday and 175 on Sunday. I think that's the 1971 figures, or something like that off the top of my head, right? And we take that and say, okay, well, we know there's some overlap between those. We're gonna suggest that maybe it was 300-ish people who turned up for this. And if you've been to the Horticultural Hall, which I have, we hosted back in 2017 an event there. There was kind of a party for the Gen Con 50th that we did around the time of GaryCon, another great convention everybody here should go to. And 300, 400 people seems like probably the amount of people you can have in that place without it being a problem, right? Without like the fire marshal being called. But yeah, as things go forward, obviously the Gen Con Origins joint venture then in 1988. 88, right?
Yeah, for the first time, yeah.
Yeah, that one was really a kumbaya moment, because you have to look at it like there had been so much conflict between Gen Con and Origins over the years, and something happened though in around 1985 to 1986, which is Gary Gygax famously left the company and was no longer working for TSR. He was succeeded by a woman named Lorraine Williams, who had no idea what all this senseless bickering was about, and just said, fix it, get everybody together, like we can work together on this, we're not enemies. And it's a big tent, rising tide, lifts all boats. That I think that proved a particularly monumental time for like the history of these conventions.
Yeah, for sure. And Origins was really struggling in those times too, because Gary Gygax in '84, before he was ousted, he claimed victory sort of in the Dragon, where he put out a post saying like, he actually called a boycott on Origins, by the way. Like he told his people coming not to go. And he ended the boycott being like, oh, we're all fine now. But if you look at it, I think he just thought they won because that year Origins attendance was 25% of what Gen Con was. So it was just clear they weren't really in competition anymore.
Yeah. Well, like let's fast forward a bit then, and we'll try to find some more methodological problems to discuss about this as we go forward. But so into the 1990s, obviously TSR started to run into some serious problems.
Oh yes.
And the accounts of what happened between, say, 1976 and 1978, they get a little messy. But as we all know, the high-level bullet is that TSR could no longer publish product. They were in debt. There were a number of structural reasons why this was true. And they end up suddenly being acquired by Wizards of the Coast, who had become profoundly wealthy. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice a bit. Profoundly wealthy from having done the Magic the Gathering game. And tell us a little bit about that transition and what you think it meant for Gen Con.
Yeah, so it really changed things quite a bit. Maybe a little less than you might think, because it was still going from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. So it was still going from one company to another company. So I mentioned that because you got to keep in mind, when the companies are running the shows, one of their main goals, while they are doing a community thing for the whole game industry, they are trying to primarily promote themselves. So now it went to Wizards of the Coast, and it was really weird for a few years, honestly, because Wizards of the Coast wanted to keep a lot of the TSR branding along from having acquired them. So you would go and you would find it's now big, a huge Wizards of the Coast booth, but there was an equally large TSR castle still there.
Yep.
And then there was also Legends of the Five Rings had a big booth, because they had acquired them as well. And it was truly Wizards show, and it also, for people who were attending at the time, while card games, collectible card games specifically, were everywhere, the show really kind of got more focused on them at the time, because that was Wizards' cash cow, of course. RPGs, board games, war games, they didn't go away, of course, but if you look at the programs or any of the sources from those times, you see really at the forefront, they're pushing Magic, they're pushing card games, and that's what really changed there. It changed again then when Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast. Now Hasbro's running Gen Con, and this was kind of a weird time because Hasbro didn't really want to be running gaming conventions. So they had this show, they had bought another company called Andon, and they were responsible for running it. And I also want to point out Andon at that time was also running the Origins game convention. So it was a period of time where basically Wizards of the Coast was running both Origins and Gen Con. And again, the show's focused on card games. They moved up until Hasbro decided, you know what, this is too much work, doesn't bring any money, let's get rid of it. And they sold it back to Peter Atkinson, the original owner of Wizards of the Coast, who had left the company by that time.
And Peter has been an amazing steward for this. If you've managed to see the program this year, there's a little 2-page tribute. I guess I did write it. I don't think I signed it, but that he has done so much to make this the convention that it is today.
Yeah.
We all owe him an immense debt of gratitude. He could not be here this year, unfortunately, but I will make sure he hears from all of us how amazing. Wow. Yeah. Okay. How amazing the convention has been this year. Can we actually, just in case he watches this video, for Peter, round of applause. But I promise to do is back around to method. So okay, in the 90s, we have a new tool.
Yes.
A tool we did not have in the 1970s to understand what people's experience of Gen Con was, what people thought about it, and that tool was?
The internet. Yeah.
I mean, of course the internet had existed before this, but by the 1990s, suddenly the problem of just getting those first-hand, crucial accounts, which I go through the dustiest fanzines, the most obscure venues, to find these accounts of people who attended these events, and just to figure out what the experience was like. But the internet changed everything.
Yeah, the internet changed it, and the internet was a major part of this book. It was one of my primary resources for finding things starting around the mid-90s or so. And some of the later chapters in the book, the sources are, other than the programs, were almost exclusively internet sources. So you have things like Usenet, which has thankfully been preserved mostly by Google Groups, so you can still find those things there. There's a few other entries that capture that stuff. In the 2000s, you had forums take over. and you were able to capture stuff off of the internet forums that still exist, mind you. And then a wonderful thing came out called the Internet Archive, which starting in 1998 was, I believe, their first year, and that is crazy, really began to preserve websites. It doesn't get them all, it doesn't show everything, but it really pulled together and preserved a lot of websites. It's very interesting looking back at some of the early Gen Con websites. I remember going back and looking at the 1996 one. You could tell TSR had no idea how to design a web page. It looked like how I would have been like a teenager at the time, and it looked like I could have done a better job. It was not a great site. And then Wizards of the Coast took over, and they had more chops in the IT ends, and they put together a much better resources on there. They had more fan support, more fan content in their forums and things like that, some of which you can still find today, some of which you cannot. But yeah, I have to give a real shout out to the Internet Archive, because this book would be very different and a lot lesser if that service did not exist.
And you see Jimmy Wales every year asking you if you'd please donate to Wikipedia, right? Internet Archive doesn't hit you that hard, but please help them. They're doing incredible work on data that otherwise we just won't have. Because here's the thing, and let's get down more to methodological brass tacks now, because we've got a half an hour. Let's get the brass
We
tacks.
gotta be done by 50 after.
We have to be done by 50? Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got 20 minutes. We'll have some time for questions, but let's really get down to the value of that contemporary report, right? Versus the value of the retrospective of, hey, you were there, what do you remember? Mike Carr, I mentioned, is someone I've worked with so much in doing game histories I've done. He read Game Wizards while it was in progress. I've interviewed him for really every book I've done about the history of D&D and TSR. And one of the things that's very refreshing about talking to Mike is that a lot of the time he's like, I don't know. I don't remember anything about it, man. And that is refreshing, because a lot of the time that's not what you get in answer to these questions. And when you look at doing oral history around an event like this, I think there are a lot of pitfalls that you can run into pretty quickly. There are a lot of people who come to these shows, been coming to these shows for a long time. I've only been coming to these shows for 20 years. I'm a tyke, right, compared to a lot of these people. And but right now, I think we're at a place where we should be profoundly grateful those people are still alive, that they can still share their stories. I want to record their stories, and then at some point we do source criticism.
Yep.
We read these stories and we say, okay, when Gary Gygax said in a book that came out, this book 40 Years of Gen Con, that at the time of the first Gen Con, the club that they had like 700 members, when in fact it had like 50 members, right? We've got to make a decision, right? When I say, and in fact it did, well, I've got their, membership rosters dated that were published at the time that we can go through and say, okay, I can give you month by month, this is exactly how many people were members of this particular club. And this gets to be a point of contention, though. And sometimes it doesn't make you friends, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people that used to be happy to talk to me at the bar because, maybe I didn't exactly agree with what they told me over 17 beers at the last Gen Con, that can be, it's a real challenge, right? For people like us who really do want those stories to come out. We want them to be recorded. We want the event of the interview of those people to be part of the historical record of today that interview happened.
Yeah.
But there's a certain amount of distance, I feel, and you can give your spin on this in a sec. There's a certain distance we did feel to have between what the actual source criticism is we reform upon these things, and what the primary sources recorded at the time deliver. And the internet, what it has done is given us those timestamps, those exact dates that these posts went up. And you can just say, okay, this was the day after this con that this person reported, hey, I saw Dave Arneson here, and Dave Arneson told me this is what I did that day. Those kinds of things are profoundly valuable.
Yeah, very much so. I do a lot of oral history work. Another project I just did, so if you didn't know, this was the 50th anniversary of Origins this year. So I did a substantial oral history project for that, where I recorded, I think it was 22 oral history interviews and put them up. And they were great, I loved doing them, but I also wrote a very short essay on the history of the convention. And some of the stuff that I wrote about, which used primary sources primarily, does not match up with what some of the oral histories I gave. Like, for one instance, we know for a fact that there was conflict between wargamers and fantasy RPG players back in the late 70s, early 80s even. Whenever I asked these people, and I asked them all, the ones that were there anyway, because not everybody was, going to Origin 50 years, this question of was there any conflict, what do they remember? They're like, oh no, it was fine, it was perfect. We were kissing and hugging, and it was a great grand old time. We had no problems whatsoever. But we know from reading primary sources this is not true. And that happens with a lot of these things. I really like to use oral histories to get a good sense, kind of the emotional feel about what was going on at the time, and maybe point me in directions of things that I wasn't aware of before. But yeah, it's really difficult, especially the longer they are. I mean, memory is not infallible. It can cause lots of problems, and it's just really difficult to just write a true history if that's all you're using as your sources.
Yeah, very much so. And what is great is, again, that so much has been preserved. And there's a figure I forget. A guy Google, Eric Schmidt, who's their CEO, said that there was this moment in time, and it was sometime around like 2004, where the amount of data we all generate from pictures, from videos, from posts, and things like that, just as part of the social media process, exceeded all of the information generated by humanity before like 1960. Every day we generate more information, right? And you can find the exact quote online. I'm sure mine is a slight exaggeration of it, but now when we look at documenting Gen Con, all of you with your phones, all of you with your I went to this and this is what it did, videos that we are taking of these things as they happen, we're going to be out of a job, right, at some point, except the source criticism part, right? And that is the job of history. And the way I often put it is, and I'm paraphrasing an academic historian here, we won't get too crunchy, but our job is to get provisional, tentative, contestable, but plausible accounts of the past. That's the job of writing. Your job isn't to be right. You're not going to get the truth, right? What you do is you take the evidence you got, you apply your source criticism layer to it, and you try to make the best, most plausible history you can with the full knowledge it'll be superseded. Yeah. Anything we do, every history book is merely a point of communication that is going to move the ball a bit further, and the next generation of people who are going to work on this, they're going to do better than we did, and that's great, because that's what this is all about.
I can tell you one thing you all can do if you want to help that history out is when you get home from Gen Con, while you're at Gen Con, write down your thoughts, take videos of your thoughts, post those online, put them in places where future historians can find them. Because one problem that I've run into is that I get a lot of the sources, they're just disappearing. It's getting more problematic these days because rather than posting on things like internet forums, you've got it on Reddit, you've got it on TikTok, you've got it on Facebook, and none of this stuff is getting saved really. So it's going to be a lot harder to create a book like this in 20 years, most likely. So if you can, create those memories and save them somewhere, you can really benefit the cultural relevance of this event and just help people tell stories about Gen Con in the future.
Yeah, because we think these are stories worth preserving. We think what happens here has changed the world. When you look at what D&D got from being here, there were those people who weren't so fond of fantasy wargaming back in the late 1970s who would say, TSR launched D&D on the back of Gen Con. It was their asset that made it possible for D&D to get out there. And honestly, were Peter here, he would say something not dissimilar to that about the role that Gen Con played in actually launching Magic and getting it to be the phenomenon that it was. Yep. I mean, it was such a killer game. We were all going to get hooked on that somehow, I'm sure. But, Gen Con was the place he knew to come to find his tribe for that. And that opportunity still exists today for all of us, and that's why it's so important we capture everything now. Because the next game that is a Magic or a D&D, it could be here right now. It could be things people are lining up for, and that promise and opportunity still exists everywhere here at Gen Con, which is why I love this place so much and why I think it is so great that people like Matt are putting together histories like this that kind of put that immense contribution of this convention into context. So thanks again, Matt, for doing that.
Yeah.
We probably have time for some questions, but let's thank Matt first.
Thank you. By the way, if you're done at the end, I do have some, they're not fancy, but there's some little flyers up here if you want to be notified when the book is coming out, which again should be, if not this month, next month. Just hit that QR code and you put your email address in and I'll send you a notice when it comes out.
Yes, in the back. evidence, not facts. We're not really the fact business. Yeah.
So, have you ever succeeded in repairing those relationships? How do you navigate the situation without them clamming up?
Yeah, I may have been, for comic effect, exaggerating a bit just how damaged these relationships can become from these things. I think I'm still on speaking terms with everyone. I might not have exactly rewritten these things, but one of the great ironies for me is when I see resistance to some of the constructions I put forward initially, and then 2 years later, I see an interview with the person and they're actually saying my talking points. That makes me trust oral history less, not more, is part of the problem I have with that. We are all interveners in this process. We may think we're not, but everything we publish, every conversation that I have with a potential oral history source, I know they're shifting. The needle is moved by that. It may be moved not the way I'd want, or it may be moved in a way that makes me even more disappointed. So,
I'd agree with that. I haven't, John, I think, has talked to more people than I have. He's been doing a lot more books than I've done so far. But you do hurt some feelings sometimes, but I've never had anyone not want to talk to me again.
I've gone unpunched thus far.
Yeah.
All right, so you were next, and then we'll go to you.
In the methodology intro to the elusive shift, you talk about this sort of chaos of publication, of zine publication.
Yes.
About how very often the date on the cover is not accurate to when it came out,
Yeah.
or in what ways it came out. Given the fact that marginalized peoples are facing a lot of censorship on the internet, a lot of us are turning towards ideas of olden practices. What are some practices that you saw in zine culture that led to productive, long-lasting, on-time zines?
Perfect. So one of the great things about zine publication, and especially what they call the amateur press associations, which I read about a lot in the Elusive Shift, these literally are just compendiums of individual authors who put in their slice to these zines. It is not controlled by anybody but that author. There is a collator whose job is to take everyone's contributions and staple them together, right, and send them out to everyone who's an interested party. I still think that is one of the most powerful and democratic means of communication. I think doing it on paper has effects that online censorship cannot touch.
Yep.
The online communities cannot, interfere with in any way. And I think the authorities, the powers that be, will never see it coming if you take that as an approach of just doing it through the mail traditionally. So I think that's a very powerful technique.
And I do want to say something we do at Temple University is we have an extensive zine collection. So we encourage anyone who does make zines, and I'm sure you don't live anywhere near Philadelphia, but wherever you are, reach out to your libraries, and it's worth depositing copies there as well.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not a historian anymore, but I relate very strongly, to your talk about sources and especially the challenge of when they stop publishing numbers that you could use. And it made me wonder, is there like a holy grail of sources, or a cache of something that either exists and you don't have access to, or that is out there somewhere that you haven't found yet, either about Gen Con or gaming in general, that you wish you had something that would help open up, maybe someone's private collection, or a corporation is squatting on somewhere.
I got it. So I'll say this: the community overall, I think, has been enormously generous to historians. Private collectors have been maybe less so. Some of the companies, as the company gets bigger, they may get less and less generous progressively around that, because more and more lawyers are concerned about what might be inadvertently disclosed in these documents. But you know what? People are employed by these companies, and they occasionally leave, sometimes not under the best circumstances. And at those times, they may have documents, and those documents may end up in various people's hands. I just nothing specific to say about that. But the world's quite open these days. It's hard to keep actual secrets these days about things like this. And it is the job of people like Matthew and I to go through and make sure that we can actually get access to both the oral history sources, both the people who can provide context and point us in the right directions, and the caches of docs that are going to get us there. Are there things, I say this in the end of one of my books, there are still things I haven't been able to see. The collecting market around this is so competitive now.
Yeah.
I fear to breathe their names because it'll just make it harder for me to get these things. And I wish this weren't the case. And in the fullness of time, it won't be. I mean, I'm not going to live forever. And there are several other people who are major collectors of this material, who I know are all working with research institutions and are trying to figure out what the transition plan will be, make sure all of our stuff ends up in places it'll be accessible to future scholars. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I mean, there's several of the collections, like I was lucky enough I know some private collectors, and they were happy to let me in to use their collection for this. And as John said, they're all planning to donate most of them. There are a couple that I'm a little more concerned about because they're not well off financially, and because the collector's market is so high, they are selling stuff off piecemeal, and that is not good to see, for sure.
It's very expensive for those of us that actually have to then vacuum that up. Yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah.
So I got you, then you, I believe. So please.
Are there certain libraries or universities that collect in this area?
Great, yeah. So I could not have done my first book, Playing at the World, without the assistance of the Brown Popular Cultural Library at Bowling Green State University, which has, among other things, the Hoosier Archives of Walter Buchanan at their disposal. For West Coast science fiction fandom, I cannot recommend highly enough visiting the University of California at Riverside, which has the 60,000 strong fanzine collection of a gentleman named Bruce Peltz, who is really integral to Los Angeles Science Fiction Society, and also the early history of things like diplomacy, or you'll find a lot of things about the origins of the Society for Creative Anachronism and kind of the precursors and parallels that, for my bread and butter work anyway on system evolution, I just couldn't do without. Who else should?
I mean, the number one that I have to mention that they've helped me for a bit is the Strong National Museum of Play, particularly I think it's the Brian Sutton Archives. I forget the name of their archives, but they've collected a lot. They got, if you don't know who, my butchers, I forgot his first name, Bromley's collection. Darwin Bromley, thank you. Darwin Bromley was, he's the Crayfair Mayfair Games, and he was a prolific collector. He had huge things, and he donated all sorts of material to them when he passed. And they have they have other great stuff too, but that's just a recent acquisition of theirs that's really helped push forward things like board game studies and things like that, because that's a little tougher to do than RPGs in some senses.
This is less about gameplay and more about oral interview. I do this as an amateur, right? And in the past, I've had a lot of really productive and interesting conversations, like going to some place, physically talking to a person, typically over a couple of glasses or something. But because the thing that I'm interested in is labor, particularly, a lot of the people I want to talk to are either working insane hours or are chronically disabled and are not able to go to a place. And do you have any recommendations on long distance oral histories?
Yeah, that's entirely how I did the Origins project. Zoom is wonderful. There's some, I will warn you though, with Zoom, it is tempting to use the AI transcript tool, but because it's an AI transcript tool, I highly recommend you notify people that they're doing that and let them opt out of it if you want them to. Yeah, using tools like that to record them works just fine. It's not as personal, and you don't get as much, you can't read some of their emotional states and things as easily as if it was in person, but it perfectly works fine. I will also warn you, I don't know what age groups you're talking about, but some of them, there are major technological hurdles to getting them to use something like Zoom. There was one guy, I was trying for 2 weeks to get him to figure out how to use Zoom. We ended up settling on a phone call that I just recorded on my end, which was not ideal because I wanted video as well if I could. But that was able to do it. There was another guy that was even too much, so I ended up interviewing him in person at a convention, which was fine. It ended up working. We were at the same spot at the same time, but it's just something that can be difficult to do.
And I will caveat everything I had to say about oral histories with the notion that, oral history has been, especially in the 20th century, what it is unveiled for things like studying the history of labor has been amazing. Yep. And, in places that don't have an exceptional culture of documentation, like, we couldn't do without oral history. It's all we have. The irony is gaming is the polar opposite of that. This is a culture with an extensive just commitment to documentation and these cadences, be they weekly, be they monthly. And so, I think we get a different perspective on it just working on that, because we have so many direct primary sources to go with that are just written down and have timestamps and literally postmarks. Like, we can tell you when this went out kind of things on them. But for things like labor, we couldn't live without oral history. So thank you for doing work on that.
Okay, well, I think.
Oh, one more in the back, and
Yeah,
then
we can do one more, and then we gotta wrap
so
up. I think.
they're starting to look at us angrily.
Along the same lines, what are ways that we, like as gamers and players and designers now, can help create historical records in the future? What should I be doing to record for the historians 30 years from now to come back and look at my book?
I think your
Yeah.
suggestion about like the strong or like Flagmata,
Yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
Flagmata collects kind of, I think they're run through the Strong now, I believe, actually. But they collect, gaming artifacts. They had a big program where they just wanted, you had gaming stuff from when you were a kid in the 1980s, send it to them. They wanted all that stuff. But yeah, writing things up is helpful. One thing you can do if you keep a blog is you can go to the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive and you can make sure it gets archived, so you can do that. That can be helpful. The other thing you can do is talk to institutions, like we just mentioned, the Strong. Even, I wouldn't talk to a local public library, but a local university library might be interested in collecting those materials as well.
Historical societies.
Yeah, historical societies. You can also reach out to us and we can give.
We can help.
Yeah, we can help. Yeah.
Please do. And thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
And again, round of applause for Matthew for the work he's been doing on this.